Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really useful, worldly wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as understanding everyday life, but with a bigger picture view.
Right. It's not just knowing facts.
Exactly. Charlie Munger was spot on, wasn't he? He would, if the facts don't hang together on a latticework of theory, you don't have them in usable form.
That nails it. It's about having a mental toolkit, you know? And that gets us to what we're exploring today. Super thinking.
Super thinking, I like that.
Yeah, we're digging into the work of Gabriel Weinberg and McCann. They've gathered these mental blueprints, mental models.
Okay.
And these are just incredibly useful for navigating, well, everything around us and making smarter choices.
And these models, they come from all over, right? Like economics, physics.
Philosophy, yeah, all sorts of places. And honestly, the applications can be, well, pretty surprising.
Like what?
Well, we're talking about finding dating advice from a 14th century philosopher.
Okay.
Understanding why just avoiding big screw-ups is maybe more important than always trying to be right.
Interesting.
And even learning about reciprocity from watching kids in an Israeli daycare.
Wow. That's quite a range.
And it matters because think about how many decisions, big and small, we make every single day.
Tons.
Right. And while one bad choice might not sink you, they add up. They really do, impacting your finances, your relationships, everything.
So instead of just like taking a stab in the dark.
Exactly. These models give you a more structured way, a much better approach, really.
Okay, so let's dig in then. What exactly are these mental models?
Well, at their core, they're these recurring concepts, these frameworks that help explain how the world works.
Okay.
Think of them like reusable mental pictures of problems. You can apply them in different situations.
So not just for, like, rocket science.
No. I mean, sure, specific industries have their own complex models. But the really powerful ones, the supermodels, as Weinberg and McCann call them, they're useful for everyone in everyday life. It's about building this collection of thinking tools.
Right. Not just searching for one single aha moment, but building a toolbox. Okay, let's get specific. First up, critical mass. My mind goes straight to, like, physics, nuclear reactions.
You got it. That's exactly where it comes from. In physics, critical mass is the minimum amount of radioactive stuff you need to start a chain reaction.
Right.
But the basic idea, it's super relevant elsewhere, especially when things need to gain traction or reach a sort of tipping point.
Okay, give us an example outside of physics.
Okay, think about the fax machine.
The fax machine. Blast from the past.
Right. Invented way back, 1840s actually. But for like a century, nothing. Barely used.
Why was that?
Well, they were expensive, so only a few companies, maybe some rich individuals, had one. And if only a few people have one.
It's not very useful, is it? Like having the only telephone.
Exactly. But then the price started to drop. More people bought them. And suddenly you get this network effect.
The network effect.
Yeah. The more machines out there, the more valuable your machine becomes because there are more people you can actually fax.
Makes sense.
Think about the connections. 2 machines, 1 connection, 5 machines, 10 connections, 12 machines, 66 connections. It grows fast.
Wow.
So by the 1970s, faxing hit that critical mass. Enough people had them that owning one actually made sense, became genuinely useful.
So the insight is building that core network first.
Pretty much. Getting enough interconnected parts of the whole thing becomes self-sustaining, valuable.
Okay, I see that. How does that play out today? Businesses must think about this.
Oh, absolutely. Think about Uber or Lyft.
Right, ride sharing.
They knew, intuitively maybe, that they needed a certain number of drivers in a city first.
Before people would bother using the app.
Exactly. Before it became convenient enough, reliable enough, they had to hit that critical mass of drivers to make the platform valuable for riders.
Fascinating. Okay, so from atoms to taxis. Next up, inversion. Sounds philosophical.
Yeah.
Or maybe like yoga.
Huh. It's definitely a thinking tool, a powerful one. The idea comes from a 19th century mathematician, Carl Jacobi. His motto was, invert, always invert.
Invert. So turn things upside down.
Basically, yeah. You can often figure out a problem more easily by looking at it from the complete opposite perspective.
So instead of, how do I succeed? You asked.
How do I avoid failing? Or, for an investor, instead of just, how do I make money?
It's, how do I avoid losing money?
Exactly. And this applies way beyond investing. Think about making decisions. We usually focus on being right more often.
Yeah, that seems logical.
But inversion suggests maybe it's more important to focus on being wrong less often.
Huh. Avoid the big mistakes.
Right. Sometimes the best path to a good outcome is just figuring out what you absolutely don't want to happen and steering clear.
It's a subtle shift, but I can see how it's powerful. How does that look practically?
Well, think about unforced errors. You hear that in tennis, right?
Yeah, hitting the ball into the net when nobody's pressuring you.
Exactly. It's a self-inflicted mistake, not because your opponent did something brilliant. In decision-making, focusing on avoiding those kinds of errors, the sloppy thinking, the overlooked details can massively improve your overall results.
Okay, so avoiding unforced errors.
Yeah.
And that leads us to first principles thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's about the quality of your reasoning.
Precisely. Avoiding those errors means really looking at how you're thinking. And first principles thinking is about building your reasoning from the ground up.
Starting with the absolute basics.
Yeah, the fundamental truths you know are solid. Elon Musk talks about this a lot. Breaking things down to their fundamental truths and reasoning up from there.
The Tesla battery example is perfect for this.
It really is. When he was starting Tesla, everyone said battery packs couldn't cost less than, what, $600 per kilowatt hour?
Something like that, yeah. Seemed like a fixed cost.
But Musk didn't just accept it. He went back to first principles. He asked, okay, what's actually in a battery pack?
The raw material.
Right. Cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, polymers, all that stuff. And then, how much do those raw materials cost on the market?
It was much less.
Way less. Around $80 per kilowatt hour at the time.
Wow, so the $600 wasn't fundamental at all.
Not at all. It was just the cost based on the existing, maybe inefficient supply chains and manufacturing processes. So his solution was, okay, let's source the materials ourselves and build the batteries in-house. Drastically cut the cost.
So the insight is, don't just accept the status quo, break it down.
Exactly. Question assumptions. Dig down to the fundamental components.
How can we use this? I don't know, when we're not building electric cars.
Okay, think about job hunting.
Right.
A lot of people just blast out resumes, right? See what sticks. Take the first decent offer.
Guilty as charged, maybe.
First principles thinking would be different. Before you even look at job listings, you'd ask, what are my fundamental values? What really matters to me in a job? Independence, learning, money, teamwork.
Okay, define the core needs first.
Then, what are my absolute deal breakers? My red lines, like I won't commute more than 45 minutes, or I need a certain level of autonomy.
Got it.
Then you start looking at jobs and see how they stack up against your fundamentals. It's kind of inversion again, isn't it? Not just what's available, but what actually fits my core requirements.
I really like that. It feels much more intentional. Okay, moving on. Occam's razor. Sounds sharp.
It is, in a way.
Yeah.
Attributed to William of Ockham, 14th century philosopher, the basic idea is simple. When you have competing explanations, and they all seem plausible.
Go with the simplest one.
Exactly. The simplest explanation is most likely to be true. You shave off the unnecessary complexity. The classic saying is, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
Right, unless you're on safari, I guess.
Assume the common explanation first.
So don't overcomplicate things unnecessarily. How does this help day to day?
Think about online dating again. The apps let you filter for everything, right? You could look for, I don't know, blue-eyed Brazilians who love hot yoga and raspberry ice cream.
Laugh someone specific.
Maybe that person exists. But Occam's razor suggests you're probably making it harder than it needs to be. It's more likely you'll find someone compatible by starting with the basics.
Like, are they kind? Do we have similar values? Do they make me laugh?
Exactly. The fundamental stuff. You can worry about the specific ice cream preferences later. Don't get bogged down in overly complex criteria right at the start.
Okay, keep it simple initially. You also mentioned this helps avoid logical traps.
You can, yeah. Like the Linda the bank teller experiment. Remember that one?
Vaguely. They describe Linda, right? Outspoken, bright, philosophy major, involved in activism.
Exactly. Then they ask, which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller. B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement.
And most people pick B, right? Because it fits the description better.
They do, but it's a trap. It's called the conjunction fallacy.
Why is it a fallacy?
Because the group of feminist bank tellers is by definition a smaller subset of the group of all bank tellers.
Ah, right. So the probability of being in the smaller group has to be lower, or equal at best.
Exactly. Adding an extra condition, and feminist, makes it less probable, not more. Occam's razor helps here. Option A is simpler. Relating it back to dating, finding someone funny is more probable than finding someone funny and who shares your very specific niche interests.
Got it. Adding criteria narrows the odds. Okay, next. Halen's razor. Another razor.
This one's more about social interactions. Hanlon's razor says, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by carelessness. Or stupidity, some versions say.
So don't assume someone's being deliberately mean.
Pretty much. We tend to jump to negative conclusions about why people do things, don't we?
Yeah, probably too often.
Psychologists call it the fundamental attribution error. We tend to explain our bad behavior based on the situation. Oh, I ran the red light because I was late and stressed.
But if someone else does it?
They're a reckless idiot. We attribute their behavior to their character, their inherent traits.
We give ourselves a pass, but not others.
Exactly. Hanlon's razor is a prompt to pause. Before assuming someone acted out of malice, ask, could this just be incompetence or thoughtlessness or a mistake?
Give me an example.
Okay, your neighbor's playing loud music late at night.
Annoying.
Your first thought might be, they're doing this just to annoy me. They're so inconsiderate.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Hanlon's razor suggests maybe they just don't realize how thin the walls are. Or maybe they lost track of time. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but assuming carelessness instead of malice often leads to a more productive conversation later.
Right. Less accusation, more problem solving. Assume incompetence before malice. Good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, the veil of ignorance. This sounds deep.
It is. It comes from the philosopher John Rawls from his big work, A Theory of Justice.
Okay.
The core idea is to think about fairness. Rawls pointed out that where we start in life, our family, our health, our talents is basically a lottery. Birth is a lottery.
You don't choose those things.
Right. And because our own position in that lottery influences our views, it's hard to be truly objective about what's fair for society as a whole.
So the veil of ignorance is a way to try and remove that bias.
Exactly. It's a thought experiment. Imagine you have to design the basic rules of a society. The catch is, you design them behind a veil of ignorance. You have no idea what your own position in that society will be once the veil is lifted.
So you don't know if you'll be rich or poor, healthy or sick, part of a majority or a minority.
Exactly. Nothing. Rawls argued that if you design society under those conditions, you'd naturally want to create rules that were fair to everyone, especially the least advantaged.
Because you might be one of the least advantaged.
Precisely. You'd want safeguards. You'd probably decide things like, say, slavery are fundamentally unjust because you wouldn't want to risk ending up enslaved yourself.
So the insight is, to judge fairness, imagine you don't know where you'll land.
Yeah. Step outside your own shoes, your own interests, and try to see it from all possible perspectives.
That's a powerful mental exercise. How could you apply that personally?
Okay, imagine you're a manager and you're thinking about getting rid of the company's remote work policy. Everyone back to the office.
Okay.
Using the veil of ignorance, you'd ask yourself, if I didn't know I was the manager, if I might be an employee with, say, long commute or caregiving responsibilities, or maybe a disability that makes commuting hard, would I still think this policy is fair?
So forcing yourself to consider the impact on others.
Right. It doesn't mean you automatically change your decision, but it forces you to genuinely appreciate other perspectives and weigh the fairness more objectively.
Very useful. Okay, let's shift gears to biology, adaptability, using the peppered moth. I think I remember this from school.
It's a classic. So England, before the Industrial Revolution, most peppered moths were light-colored. Why?
They're blended in with the lichen on the trees, right? Avoided birds.
Exactly. Then came the factories, coal smoke, soot everywhere.
Making the trees dark.
Right. So suddenly, the light moths stuck out like a sore thumb, but there was always a small number of naturally occurring dark moths.
And they suddenly had the advantage.
Big time. Birds ate the easy-to-see light ones, the dark ones survived and reproduced, and the population shifted dramatically.
What were the numbers?
Between roughly 1811 and 1895, in some industrial areas, the dark form went from maybe 0.01% of the population to like 98%.
Wow, that's fast evolution.
It really shows Darwin's survival of the fittest, but there's a key clarification here. As Leon Megginson, interpreting Darwin, pointed out, fittest doesn't necessarily mean strongest or smartest.
It means
Most adaptable, most responsive to change in the environment. That's the real lesson from the moths for us.
So change is constant, and we need to be able to adapt, just like the moths did.
Exactly. Societies evolve, technology changes, circumstances shift. Personal adaptability is crucial.
How do we cultivate that? How do we become more adaptable?
One really good way is to adopt an experimental mindset. Think like a scientist, even in your own life. Observe what's happening. Form a hypothesis. Maybe if I try X, Y will happen. Test it out. Rigorously, if possible. Analyze the results. Did it work? Why or why not? And then be willing to update your ideas or try something new based on the evidence.
So, less dogma, more trial and error.
Yes. Successful people, successful organizations are constantly experimenting, finding better ways to do things, improving their health, growing intellectually.
To be an example.
Think about health and diet. There's so much conflicting advice, right? Vegan, paleo, keto, fasting.
It's overwhelming.
An adaptable experimental approach says, okay, the only way to know what works for me is to try things. Maybe try vegan for a month, track how I feel, my energy levels, blood work maybe, then try something else. It's structured trial and error.
Rather than just picking one and sticking to it forever, even if it's not working.
Exactly. Same with our ideas. We have to be willing to challenge our old beliefs when new evidence comes along. Think about, I don't know, dinosaurs. Our picture of T-Rex has changed, hasn't it? From sluggish tail dragger to maybe feathered, more agile predator. Science adapts. We should too.
Be willing to update our mental software. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, now for something that trips a lot of us up, statistics. Avoiding statistical stumbles.
Yeah, we live in a data-driven world, right? Numbers everywhere. But they can be tricky.
Mark Twain's quote comes to mind.
Lies. Damned lies and statistics.
Exactly. Numbers can mislead easily. We need to be aware of the common pitfalls.
That's a big one.
Relying too heavily on anecdotal evidence.
So, personal stories. My uncle smoked till he was 90, kind of thing.
That's the perfect example. Evolutionarily, it makes sense we'd listen to personal stories. Don't eat those berries, my cousin got sick. Useful, right?
But in our complex world, single stories, especially dramatic ones, often don't reflect the average or the overall reality. That uncle who smoked and lived long, he's an outlier. He doesn't negate the mountains of statistical evidence showing smoking is incredibly harmful.
Same with online reviews, maybe. We remember the one terrible review or the one glowing one.
Exactly. Extreme cases stick in our minds, but they can skew our perception of what's typical. Relying on averages and larger data sets is usually much safer. Be wary of basing big decisions on just one or two stories.
Okay, so beware the anecdote. What's another common stumble?
The classic. Correlation does not imply causation.
Right. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Precisely. We see patterns, and our brains love to make causal links, but sometimes they're just coincidences, or there's a third factor involved.
Like the flu shot example.
Perfect example. People get their flu shot around the same time. Maybe they catch a cold because, well, it's cold and flu season, lots of viruses circulating.
And they blame the shot. The flu shot gave me a cold.
Right. They see the correlation got shot, then got sick, and assume causation. But the shot didn't cause the cold. The real cause was likely just exposure to a cold virus during a time of year when illness is more common. The timing was coincidental or related to the season, not the vaccine itself.
So we need to be careful not to jump to cause and effect conclusions just because things happen near each other.
Very careful. Always ask, is there another explanation? Could something else be causing both things?
Good point. Okay, finally, let's talk about understanding social dynamics and specifically reciprocity.
Yeah. So much of life involves interacting with others. You could call these interactions social games.
Like in-game theory?
Kind of. Some situations might feel zero-sum. You know, one person wins, the other loses. But many situations aren't like that. There's potential for everyone to benefit, and reciprocity is key here.
Reciprocity. The idea of returning favors. Give and take.
Exactly. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's a fundamental social glue, quid pro quo.
Can you give an example of it in action?
There's a famous study, Robert Cialdini talks about it in his book Influence, about tipping in restaurants.
Okay.
Waiters who gave diners a small, unexpected gift with the bill, like a single mint, saw their tips increase by about 3%.
Just for 1 mint?
Yep. But if they gave 2 mints, tips went up by around 14%.
Wow.
And get this. If the waiter gave 1 mint, started to walk away, then turned back and said, but for you nice folks, here's an extra mint, tips jumped by 23%.
That little extra gesture made a huge difference.
Huge. It triggered that feeling of obligation, that desire to reciprocate the kindness.
So it's a powerful social norm.
Extremely powerful. But it's important to know when we're operating under social norms like reciprocity versus market norms.
Market norms, like paying for a service, self-interest.
Exactly. And things get messy when you mix them up or when one replaces the other.
You mentioned an Israeli kindergarten.
Yes. Fascinating story from Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. This kindergarten had a problem. Parents were often late picking up their kids.
Annoying for the teachers, I bet.
Totally. So management decided to introduce a fine for late pickups. Seems logical, right? Deterrent.
Yeah, makes sense. Did it work?
Nope, it backfired. Parents started arriving late even more often
Seriously, why?
because the fine shifted the whole frame. Before, being late was a violation of a social contract. Parents probably felt guilty, felt they were inconveniencing the teachers they likely had a relationship with.
Okay, social pressure?
But the fine turned it into a market transaction. Suddenly, being late wasn't about letting someone down, it was a service you could pay for. The guilt was replaced by a price tag. Okay, I'll just pay the fine for the extra time.
So the financial penalty removed the social penalty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's really telling is when they later removed the fine, the lateness didn't go back down. The social norm had been damaged, replaced by the market norm thinking, and it stuck.
Wow. That really shows you need to understand which game you're playing, social rules or market rules.
Absolutely. Applying the right mental model, framing the situation correctly is crucial. Understand the power of reciprocity, but also understand when introducing money can change everything.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful, a really practical tour through these mental models.
Yeah, the core idea of super thinking, as Weinberg and McCann put it, is just using these proven concepts from all over the place.
To understand things better.
That and to make better decisions, avoid those common thinking traps we fall into.
We've hit on so many Occam's razor for simplicity, critical mass for tipping points, the veil of ignorance for fairness. It's a really diverse toolkit.
It really is.
So what's a practical takeaway? Something listeners can maybe try out.
Well, one simple thing is to upgrade your basic pro-con list. We all do those, right?
Sure.
Try adding numbers. When you weigh a decision, assign a value to each pro and con, maybe scale of n of a 10 to plus 10 based on how much it matters to you.
So not just listing them, but weighting them.
Exactly, that job offer, that means relocating. Maybe the higher salary is a +8, but the disruption of moving is a -7, leaving family is a -9, better career path is a +6. It forces a more systematic cost-benefit analysis based on your actual values.
That makes it much clearer than just a list. Good tip. Any suggestions if people want to dive deeper into this kind of thinking?
I definitely recommend Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets.
Oh, the former poker player.
That's her. We've talked about making better decisions, but life is full of uncertainty, right? You can make a great decision and still get a bad outcome sometimes.
True. Luck plays a part.
Duke's book is fantastic on thinking in probabilities, making smart choices when you don't know everything, and crucially, learning to evaluate your decisions, not just the outcomes.
Excellent. We'll put a link to that.
Okay.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive, here's a final thought for you, the listener. Which mental model we discussed today resonates most with the challenge you're facing right now? Could be anything: work, relationships, a personal project. Think about that challenge. Now, try looking at it through the lens of one of these models, maybe invert it. Apply Occam's razor. See it from behind the veil of ignorance. How might shifting your perspective in that way unlock a new insight, or maybe even a solution you hadn't considered before?
Food for thought.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.